In this video, I'm gonna be going over sky blends within Photoshop. Sky blends are essentially a type of exposure blend where you take a separate image of your sky and you blend it into your original image. Now, there are two primary reasons why you'd want to do this. The first reason is for a singular scene where you are compensating for a lack of dynamic range within your camera. The second reason is for a sky replacement. So if you want to replace a boring sky with a better, more interesting sky. So I'm gonna be going over both of these different techniques for sky blending within this video. Let's go ahead and start with the first reason, which is for a singular scene. So essentially what I mean by a lack of dynamic range is if your sky is much brighter than your foreground. If you end up exposing your camera for the sky in order to save those highlights and not blow them out, it could mean that your foreground is going to be so dark and shadowy that when you go to pull out those details within Photoshop, you're going to find that it is super grainy and you might even be clipping some of your blacks and not be able to recover any of that detail. Therefore, the solution is to take two separate images. You take one of the sky that's exposed properly and one of the ground that's exposed properly and blend them all together. I do want to make a note that this is a technique you don't have to use very often if you're using a higher end camera. Most high-end cameras you can simply expose for the sky, and if you're shooting raw, you'll have enough detail in that foreground, even if it looks dark, to pull it out in post-processing and make something look good out of it. However, if you're shooting with lower end cameras, your dynamic range isn't going to be as good, and it's a better practice to get in the habit of doing these exposure blends. So let's go ahead and hop right into Photoshop and let me show you an example. All right, so we got these two images here. And as you can see with this first image, the sky is fairly blown out here. But we have a nice detailed foreground here. In the second image, we have a very nice sky that is perfectly in shape, but the foreground is so dark you can't even see anything. So I want to combine those two images together. The first step to do this would be to do your typical adjustments within Lightroom. So as you can see, I did my basic tone and white balance adjustments, and this image is ready to go. The second image here, I haven't really done many adjustments to because I actually really like the way this sky looks. It's dark, it's moody, and it's got a nice tone contrast here. If anything, I might be able to make it a bit more warm, but that's all I'd really want to do to it. All right, so these two images are ready to go. So we're gonna go ahead and select both of them, edit in Photoshop, open as layers. All right, so we have these two images right here on top of each other and ready to blend. The first thing we're gonna do here is select both of them and go to Edit Auto Align Layers to make sure this horizon here is perfectly lined. This is super important with exposure blends, or else you're gonna get a little bit of crossover between the horizons if they're not perfectly straight, and it's not gonna work. All right, so these are now aligned, and you can see this edge needs to be cropped a tiny bit. So let's go ahead and crop it ever so slightly here to get those corners out. All right, we are good to go on that front. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you two different ways to blend these images together. The first one is the most basic method, and I would try this always before trying the second method, which is a bit longer and more advanced. So the most basic method is you simply create a mask on this top layer here, click the gradient tool. You're going to want to make sure the linear gradient button is selected here, and this white to black gradient is selected under basics. And now you can simply drag it down and it will blend them together. Now you're gonna have to experiment with this a few times. So let's go ahead and that actually looks great right there. Usually I don't get it that fast. But you basically wanna find a blend here where the mask is slowly layering the sky in, and you got a nice gradient along this horizon here where it's not very noticeable that you blended it. And I'd say this is actually almost perfect. So that was a really lucky blend right there. I normally just hit Control Z there, and you can just keep undoing that gradient and retrying until you get it perfect. So that is the first method there. Another way to do this, if you'd rather not use the gradient tool, is you can go ahead and delete that mask. You can get out a paintbrush here, a black one, and begin to paint in this mask manually. I'd recommend making sure you have a very, very soft brush ready so that it's feathered along these edges. Make sure it's nice and big here and paint this sky in and get a nice feather along that horizon there where you can blend these two skies together. All right, so I would say that's looking pretty good. But as you can see, we are getting a little bit of darkness along that mountain range right there. So these gradient and these painting methods usually aren't the most accurate. They're usually better if you have a super flat horizon. So now let's talk about how to do the more advanced method of blending these images together, but also more accurate. And it involves luminosity masks. So we're gonna go ahead and make sure the layer with the brighter sky and exposed foreground is selected. And we're gonna make a lights 1 mask of that. So we simply go to channels and control click on RGB. Create the mask here. We can name it to lights 1, unselect these, and now go back to our layers. And this time we're gonna drag the sky on top, and we're gonna apply that lights 1 mask to this top image. And now, as you can see, we have it leaking down to the bottom, and these are blended together. The only problem with this image is it's also leaking some other lights from the other parts of the images that we don't want. So now we can simply switch to a white brush here and brush out these parts that don't look that great up top here. So let's go like that. All right, and now let's switch to a black paintbrush with X, and now we could paint this border right here. And there we go. So now if we pull up this luminosity mask here, you can see we have a much more thorough blend of these images, and it's a much more accurate. So let's go ahead and control click that. And if you zoom in, you can see that's looking pretty nice along that horizon right there. If you really want to get accurate with this, I can also go ahead and do some adjustments to this mountain, for example, where it's a little bit dark on the top. So I can go ahead and make a selection here. Let's make sure this is selected of this mountain range here. And we'll just add the rest of this in there. Now I could go ahead and create a brightness adjustment and get that mountain tuned up a little bit better. You can also go ahead and fix the layer mask and make sure that applies only to that mountain part right there. Get this all done. And now when we adjust this, we're only going to be adjusting the brightness on that mountain there. Can get rid of that a little bit, and it's looking pretty good along that horizon there. So now I could go ahead and do my normal editing of this image. So that is how you can blend two images together to compensate for a dynamic range. All right, so now let's talk about the second method you might want to do a sky blend, which is for sky replacements. So a lot of photographers find this unethical, but I personally like to do it every once in a while. And if you go back to my philosophies video, I have a scrapbooking mindset principle where I believe that if I take a photo of a sky, I can go ahead and apply it to any of my other images as long as it's my photo. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to do that. So say we got this image right here, which has a awesome foreground here that I focus stacked and did all the editing on. But the only problem is this sky just looks extremely boring. So let's go ahead and look at this sky here, which is super moody and honestly looks awesome. I want to go ahead and blend this sky into this image here. So Photoshop recently made this really easy with a sky replacement button. So in order to do this, we're simply going to go up to Edit here and click Sky Replacement. This is going to go ahead and bring up our menu where we can add the skies into the image. So as you can see here, these are the default skies that Photoshop has. But I want to go ahead and add my own personal sky. So what I did here is I created a folder here with this button, and now I could select it and click this plus button here, find the sky that I want from my computer and hit open. Now it's going to go ahead and import that sky, and if I select it, we'll see it overlay on the image here. The only problem is that the sun is in the wrong direction. As you can see, the sun is actually setting over here in the real image. So this is the most important part of sky replacements. You can't just replace any sky with any sky. You really want to make sure that the lighting in the sun is coming from the same direction and that the images have a general color scheme that works together. So let's go ahead and click this flip button here. Just gonna flip the sunset over there. And now we have a variety of options to help adjust the sky to blend it with the foreground. So let's go ahead and start with the shift edge, which as you can see is going to start blending it almost into this cactus here, which we don't want. So let's go ahead and reduce that. The fade edge is going to fade it a bit more. Let's keep it like that. Let's adjust the brightness a bit here. We do want this to look natural, and we don't want to overdo the sky. It can be tempting to go in and just flood the sky with colors, but you really want to be subtle with it. So we'll brighten that up, and now let's adjust the temperature a bit. Ooh, so I think I'm liking it on this bluer end here because it matches this ocean and these rocks a bit better. So let's keep that a bit cooler of a temperature. Definitely not that much. Maybe like right about here. And now we can go ahead and scale it, see if we want it any bigger. You can also go ahead and move it like this if you want to move that edge a bit. So let's get that sun peeking out a little bit there. Maybe a bit like that. And I think that's looking good for the top. Now let's go to the foreground, which is going to adjust all of this area down here. So let's see what these tools do. I darkened the ocean a little bit. I liked that. Edge lighting doesn't really do much, to be honest, so let's keep that the same. And I don't think color adjustment is going to do a lot in this image either. Some of these adjustments are more particular to different types of scenes. So I think that's looking pretty good. Let me adjust this brightness one more time. And let's go ahead and hit enter on that. And as you can see, it went ahead and created a group for us here where all those adjustments have been made. And if you want to, you can really go in and fine tune any of these and see exactly what they're doing here with this tool. So let's go ahead and close that. One final thing I might do to this image here actually is do a little bit of color dodging. So as you can see along this cactus here, there's already a little bit of light hitting these edges here, but I might go ahead and just throw a little bit more in. So let's go ahead and create a new dodge layer here, or yeah, dodge layer. Hit soft light, brush, and let's go ahead and select some of this yellow from the sunset here. Go ahead and lighten that up if you remember from the dodge chapter. Let's decrease that opacity a bit. And now let's go ahead and just hit the brush tool and paint a little bit of that sunset into the edges of this cactus here, just to make it a bit more believable and get some of those tones from the sunset in the image here. So that's really all you need to know about sky blends. In the next video, I'm going to talk about a time blend, and then I have another video talking about a focal blend, so you can get the full scoop on all the types of exposure blends. Let's go ahead and hop to the next video.